So you're all very welcome to Going Ballistic, the Sling and Sport and Warfare. And just to, I suppose, give you a bit of a background to today, the sling as a weapon is probably ubiquitous throughout human history. It has been used throughout the world, through space and time, but we do have some gaps in the evidence. Certain time periods, certain geographical areas where we don't have clear evidence of sling use, or where we have it, then it stops, it reappears again. This is puzzling to archaeologists, but it's not something that has necessarily been investigated in a lot of detail. And this is what I'm interested in, and how the research project that I'm involved in at the moment and this associated event came about. It's really about looking for evidence of sling use and what kind of evidence we should be looking for to document their use in the past. Okay, just so you know what we're going to be doing today, I'm going to start with a very brief introduction of what a sling is and how we actually use it. Cover very briefly the history of sling use with a few examples from different time periods, different areas of the world. So this is by no means a comprehensive survey, and I know I have a mixed audience. Some of you are archaeologists, osteoarchaeologists, and you have different backgrounds. Some of you probably just have a passing interest in history and archaeology. So this is a very, very broad overview. I'm then going to briefly talk about the experiments that the research project we're doing at the moment is employing to look at sling use and skeletal trauma. And then we have a quick tea break, and then we're going to go out onto the pitch. We're going to have a demonstration by Silvio Vaz, who's come over from Germany to work on this with me, to show you, how a proficient slinger uses a sling, and then all of you have the opportunity to try out how to use a sling. And you'll be pleased to hear there'll be a prize for the best slinger. Okay. And something else I should emphasize here is that this is very much a team effort, and a lot of people have contributed to this, MSc students, PhD students, and Silvio's come over from Germany, and he's not an academic, but he's been doing slinging for a long, long time. And he's a proficient slinger, and he has such an intimate knowledge of how slings work, what ammunition to use, what's involved, and also the history of sling use, that is probably beyond most academics. And it's really important for these projects, if you really want to get a good sense of the subject, it's really important to involve, those.
Sorry, is this the...
Sorry?
Is this the...
Sling? Yes, come in please. Thank you very much. It's really important to involve those who know most about it. And a lot of reenactors have really invaluable knowledge about weapon use that we as academics haven't really fully tapped into. And I think also from the reenactment side, sometimes they feel they're not being taken seriously by academics, but I think they have a lot to contribute. And this is the case for this project as well. So where do you think the oldest surviving sling comes from?
Middle East, like somewhere in Levant.
Okay, not bad. Anybody else? Everybody agrees? Anybody want to suggest anything else? It's not a trick question. Sorry?
Rift Valley sort of area.
Sorry?
The Rift Valley.
Okay. These are probably the oldest surviving slings in the world. So I'm talking about the actual sling itself, and you can see some ammunition as well. So something that's probably obvious to archaeologists looking at this, but just to reiterate for the rest of you, if you don't have a background in archaeology, what are slings made out of? It's organic materials. So these only survive in very special conditions, either very arid conditions, hot and dry, or very cold conditions, or very wet conditions. Okay. So if you think about climate throughout the world, you're already going to have limits in terms of the survival of the actual implements themselves. And a lot of the time when we're documenting sling use archaeologically through finds, we're actually looking at the ammunition rather than the actual slings themselves. So how did it all start in human history? When did we start using slings, and what's the evidence? And what other implements, weapon instruments might be, related to the sling? I mean, the obvious thing to use if you want to hit something as a very simple weapon is a stone. Okay, and this is just an example. This is from the Paleolithic, but it could be any era. It's a rounded stone. Some people have suggested this might be evidence of maybe sling use, or at the very least, obviously starting to look at long distance weapons or implements, throwing a stone rather than just going up to somebody and hitting them with the stone, or hitting faunal remains, food, animals with them. Next, we have spear throwers, atlatls. The earliest evidence for those goes back to the Paleolithic, so the earliest human history. And just to show you an example, this is one here. And why does this survive all the way back to us now? This is, I think, around 15 or 20,000 years old. It's a material it's made out of. So this is ivory, basically. But to just show you a modern example, this is from Australia. So this is native groups still using these implements, and this is made out of wood. If it had been made out of wood in the Paleolithic, it probably wouldn't survive to us today. Bolas. Something like this, a number of stones tied together by slings that are being thrown, quite often and much more recently used by shepherds and herders and also to kind of keep animals in checks, trip them, maybe sometimes even hunt them. Okay, and here you can see the start of using, the cord and the stones. But obviously, if you're throwing it, you're letting the whole thing go. You're potentially losing the whole weapon as well, depending on how far you're throwing and what happens to it. Staff slings, something like that. So these are modern recreations of something you can see in a lot of medieval manuscripts. Okay, so you basically have a staff and a pouch tied to it, and you're putting your ammunition into that and you're throwing. So again, like with a spear thrower, you're just getting more leverage, kind of meaning you're extending your reach and the strength of your throw. What is this? This is Michelangelo's David, and you can see here that's his hand. And it has recently, a number of years ago, suggested that he's actually clutching potentially the remains of maybe something like a staff sling. So whether that's true or not, I'm just going to leave that out here. The bow, at the first look, probably quite different from the sling, but again, it's a long reach, long distance weapon. And one of the earliest, or maybe the earliest bows comes from Denmark, found in a wet context because it's made out of wood. Just remember what I said, it doesn't survive very well except in a particular circumstance. So this was a wet environment. This is about, I think, 9,000 years old from Mesolithic Denmark. And then finally, something, maybe not many people are aware of, pellet bows. What are pellet bows? In a sense, they're like our standard bows, but rather than having a simple string, they have like a sling-like pouch at one end that you load with ammunition and you use them to shoot. And these days, they're around still in some parts of Thailand, used for hunting birds, etc. So the shot that you're using is a lot smaller than, what I've shown here, that big, massive stone there at the top. So all of these, or some of these, might be related to the development of the sling. So a bit about sling terminology. What are we talking about? I suppose at the first glance, they're relatively simple implements, but using them requires a lot of skill and requires training. So, and I'm just going to pass a number of examples around, and you can see there's differences, especially in the pouch, the middle bit. Also, some have, at what first glance looks like embellishments, like beads, etc. But I'm going to get back to that in a minute. So you have the pouch in the middle. So this is where your ammunition goes. You have a finger loop to hold them, and then you have a knot, sometimes a trimmed end. That's the part that is released. So this is called the release cord, and this is called the retention cord. And here's an example of the sling by that Sylvia has made and plated himself. Okay. So you can see the ones that are going around. In some of them, the pouch consists of these, like, basically two strings. So there's a kind of a hole in the middle. Some of them are solid. And I was always wondering, why would you know, what would be the difference? But with continued use, there is obviously a lot of stress placed on that. And if you have a solid pouch, that's much more likely that will kind of, you know, extend and in a sense deform and and in the end you won't have the ammunition sitting as snug in it anymore. So, and in terms of the beads that you see in one of them at either end, again, these are areas where a lot of stress is put on the implement. So if you put those beads, they're much less likely to tear or rip at those vulnerable points. Again, I mean, you know, during the tea break, Sylvia very kindly brought a whole number of slings and different types of ammunition, some of which you'll see throughout this talk. So you'll have an opportunity to have a look at that. So how does it actually work? Very broadly, there's two techniques to actually using a sling. And you'll see this one here, which is like an underhand throw. So you see the direction of the rotation and the release there. And then you have an overhand throw, and I've just included a short video to kind of give you an idea of a preview of what you're going to see in the slinging demonstration. So you can see here the rotation and then the release. And that's saying quite simple. Easy peasy, okay? Okay. So quite often people wonder, how difficult is it actually to use a sling? Well, you're all going to find out. I've talked to Sylvia about this in terms of, you know, showing people how to do it. And he says, if you train, probably within a week, you can probably become reasonably good. Eine Woche, damit man hinkriegt? You know, that would be a good instruction, but obviously, I mean, he's been doing that for over a decade now. That's why he's here, because as part of our research, we need to hit relatively small targets. But so a week of training also means, you know, it's not an elitist weapon. You know, anybody, you know, can pick it up and do this. Yes?
Quick question. Does the slings have a particular hand that they're made to be used with?
A particular, sorry?
Hand. So if I'm trying to use any given sling with my left hand as opposed to my right, is that going to make a difference?
Well, I presume it'd be your dominant arm would kind of, or would that make a difference to the sling?
Would it make a difference to the sling?
That's I wouldn't say so. Ob man Rechts- oder Linkshänder ist, ob man da eine andere, würdest du die anders flechten? No, because it's you know, I mean, there's nothing in a sense on the sling itself that makes it, you know, directional in terms of the hand. So a good week of training, but obviously a lot longer if you want to become really proficient. But keeping in mind, you know, anybody could try and use it. So also in terms of, you know, you've just seen, you know, the two shots. How fast can you actually fire with this? So again, to give you an idea. So, and that's what I mean with within a week, you can probably become quite proficient, but that takes a lot of training. But also, maybe, I don't know what your preconceptions were about slings and how fast you can shoot. That's pretty fast. Okay. So, that's something else to keep in mind if we consider sling use in the past. So, ammunition. You know, these are, again, some examples, different periods, different part of the world. Tel Hamukar site in Syria, 4th millennium BC. and you can see these fairly large, fairly rounded projectiles, mostly clay. Okay, and they've been found in large caches. So again, because there's such a large number of them, that's documented sling use. If you just found one of them in isolation, how would that get interpreted? I don't think necessarily people would immediately go, oh, somebody was using a sling. So most of the time, if we have well-documented sling use, it's about these large caches of ammunition. Okay, shapes start to change, towards kind of the first, second millennium BC, and we're going towards, not universally, but in some parts of the world, these kind of more conical shapes you can see here. And this is a Bronze Age example. You can see it's quite pointed. And they're also very well documented in the Greek and Roman world. And this is quite interesting. There an inscription saying, take that. I take that, you bastard. And that's actually a tradition that survives to the present day. In modern warfare, people inscribe stuff on rockets, bombs being dropped. Okay? So such is the universal nature of conflict and human involvement in conflict. Again, I'm going to just randomly pass it around. This is the ammunition we're using for our experiments. Okay? So while you can see, it's probably, in a way, it can be described as a mix between the round and the conical shape. Yes?
Why do you think they changed from a round, more aerodynamic shot to a more...
Well, it's not universal. Okay, but also depends on, and I'm going to get to that, how you employ them, whether you have a kind of army of slingers and whether they're doing a bit like having an army of archers shooting in, and then, it's the mass of the, shots that actually results in hits, otherwise whether you're shooting on target. But some of these, especially the pointed one, and you could be able to look at some of these later, they can kind of dent and go through armor as well, depending on what kind of armor you have. Okay. And also, they kind of, and again, Sylvia knows a lot more about this, they do tend to hit with the pointy bit, as you shoot them. Okay. But again, coming back to the archaeological record, these are vaguely the same, but not completely uniform. Yet Sylvia picked those. They work for him. They're all a certain weight. That's the weight actually denoted of them. 195 grams, 206 grams, etc. Also quite heavy. If you read a lot of the literature, a lot of the books say, between 60 and 80 grams is ideal for slinging. It depends on what you're trying to do with it. Depends on the proficiency of the slinger, etc., etc. Okay. But again, if you only found 2 or 3 of those kind of stones, they're not worth anything. Please pick them up on the beach, on the fields. How do you interpret that? Unless you find 500 of them, we're saying, whoa, a big cache. How do you interpret that if you only find a few? Okay. And especially in the period I'm interested in, which is earlier prehistory, the Neolithic, or the latter part of the Stone Age, we're not necessarily talking about large armies. It's people going out hunting, raids, etc. So they might have a few of them with them, but not a cache of 200 that immediately screams, this is a cache of sling stones. So these are the ones Sylvia will be using. This is what you'll be using. when you are, and this is obviously a health and safety issue. We started the experiments on Tuesday. I don't know whether anybody can cast their mind back to what the weather was like on Tuesday. It was bloody windy. So there's a health and safety issue. So you'll be using tennis balls. So what happens when you shoot a sling? And that's coming back to, how you employ plunging fire versus direct fire. So plunging fire, you have a mass of slingers, and they're all kind of slinging, probably aiming quite high. And then you have gravity working with you. So there's the height of the trajectory as you're throwing, and then terminal velocity and impact momentum aided by gravity. So you're throwing, and then at that point you just have a sheer drop. So you have acceleration of the ammunition and a fairly powerful hit. And from this to this, the force of the impact almost doubles. Okay. So that's one way to employ it. And then you have direct fire, which is in a sense what we're seeing today. So trying to hit a particular target. So a few things that play into how strong or the hit is departure velocity, so speed at the time of letting go from the string, the range you're covering, and the weight of the missile, of course, and trying to hit a relatively small target at the distance, just to demonstrate how skilled you have to be. So this is a hit on target, and if you just release a fraction of a second early or late, you're going to miss. So again, slings are always seen as the primitive weapons, kind of compared to the elegance of the bow, etc. But there is a lot of skill involved. So now a very brief kind of run through some archaeological and historical examples of sling use and where we have evidence of sling use. So starting in the Neolithic, the latter part of the Stone Age, very famous site, Çatalhöyük, where a wall drawing of a slinger is present. Hopefully you can see that here. And as Sylvia pointed out, see this little kind of hook there. He says it's quite accurate, the placement of the foot kind of slightly turned in. So that's a fairly accurate depiction of slinging. And those are the type of, different types of ammunition that are associated with the site. I really became interested initially because my work has been mostly in Western and Northern Europe, where we don't really have the wall paintings of the slingers or ammunition caches. Quite recently, I've come across references to small clay balls found in early Neolithic assemblages. Something along the lines of, you'll see some later if you want to have a look during the tea break, that you see on the table there. Sometimes they're perforated, and then they're usually interpreted as something to do with weaving, but if they're not perforated, what are they? And they might be, again, evidence for sling use, not found in the hundreds of thousands, not in caches, but in small assemblages. Looking at early Bronze Age, late Iron Age Assyria, very famous site Nineveh, first millennium BC, again, pictorial evidence of sling use. And you can see the slingers here with the ammunition sitting in the pouches. And again, something like this, a fairly largeable, sizable, ammunition used there. Just to show that we're not just centering on one part of the world. The prehistoric Andes, 1st century BC, what are we looking at? For the non-archaeologists, probably just a bunch of rocks. That's actually a fortified site, or what's left of a fortified site. And if you look, just above the arrow in the center, you can see this collection of stones. Okay, so these are actually slingshot. And that's a surviving archaeological example from the region. So again, have a look at the pouch. Remember what I said earlier on about the weakness of the pouch if it's solid and kind of getting bent and kind of, you have these, eventual damage to it. So if you have these kind of, this network pattern with holes in it, that's less likely to happen. Closer to home, Iron Age and Roman Britain. Very close to home, Orogramme Ford in Perthshire. And there you can see these biconical, this biconical slingshot ammunition. So what were the natives doing at the time in terms of slingshot? Here we're going very far south to Maiden Castle in Dorset. Don't know, anybody here been to Maiden Castle or thought of it before? So a massive hill fort, fortified site. A long history of use that I can't go into, but what we're interested in is the slingshot found at the site. Yeah, it's quite interesting. Here we're really talking massive caches. Okay, so again, no question of arguing about sling use being quite prevalent at the site. What about historical sources? The early historical source, what do they tell us about sling use? Anybody, that's a very, very small kind of extract of a map. Anybody recognize those from their holidays, maybe?
Balearic Islands.
Very good, the Balearic Islands. And here we find some of the earliest written sources documenting very proficient slinging. So Strabo, around, the birth of Christ writes, they are spoken of as the best of slingers, and this art they have practiced assiduously, so it is said, ever since the Phoenicians took possession of the islands. And their training in the use of slings used to be such from childhood up that they would not so much as give bread to their children unless they first hit it with the sling. That kind of, there's an echo of that in the longbow use in the medieval period in England, where it was, every able-bodied male, I think, I can't remember from what age, I'm not a medievalist, was, by law required to train the longbow. It doesn't say they wouldn't be fed otherwise, but this is why Meletus, when he was approaching the islands from the sea, stretched heights above the decks as a protection against the slings. So there you're talking about plunging fire, obviously coming from the islands. And slinging is still a big thing today in the Balearic Islands, but I'll come back to that in a minute. Okay. Anybody recognize this image? Where is this from? Anybody interested in the Roman period here? I'll give you a clue. This is Trajan's column.
It's that big column.
It's Trajan's column, completed in 113 AD. And again, you see slingers, ammunition. It's not quite clear in terms of, what, group of people, where they're meant to be from, what that is depicting, but there have been suggestions they might be a group of Balearic slingers. Okay. In the Middle Ages then, the pictorial evidence we have mainly focuses on staff slings, okay, as you can see in these two images. Okay, so not the type of sling we're talking about today, but mostly staff slings. And again, just to kind of get away from Europe and show the extent of sling use, the Pacific Islands, these are examples of Chamorro sling stones and a sling as well from Mariana. And slinging, these islands have been populated from, before the birth of Christ. So again, we're probably looking at quite a long tradition of sling use, though obviously the sling example here is more recent than that. And here are some examples from sling stones into sling from the museum in Hawaii. So again, keep in mind global use of the sling. What about the 20th century and beyond? The sling is still being used today, and it's still being used as a weapon. Okay. And you can see different types of ammunition, from stones to hurling, even more dangerous implements, kind of grenades and stuff, using the sling. What I want to briefly talk about now is actually the sling and sport. Okay, we've mostly talked about slings as a weapon, but in some parts of the world, it's still used for sport and also in the sphere of animal keeping and herding, okay, to defend a flock or to keep the flock in check. And this statue here, this is from the Balearic Islands. You can see when is the last time you've came across a recent statue of a slinger. So that just shows that in that part of the world, slinging is still very much a big thing. So much so that in some parts of the world, they have competitions, okay? So I just want to give two examples. We're going back to the Andes, and again, there you have competitions where people kind of try to demonstrate their skill in sling use, as well as in the Balearic Islands. And Silvio here has been to they have an annual competition, and he's going up there again at the end of the month. So so the skill of sling use continues, but in this case for recreational purposes rather than as a weapon. Okay, so I've been talking about this. I'm an human osteoarchaeologist or bioarchaeologist. I'm interested in using human skeletal remains to look at past lives. So we do find documented slingshot injuries. Most of the time they've kind of confirmed the slingshot injuries because you have at the site where you find the injuries documented use of slings, such as the surviving ammunition. But more and more people have started to propose that we don't maybe necessarily need to have the ammunition in place. We can look at the fracture patterns. This is an example from Iron Age Roman Britain, from a paper by Rebecca Redfern, who suggested that we need to look more at these injuries, and maybe a lot of them which we just term blunt force injuries. Some blunt object caused this. A lot of them could actually be caused by slings. Okay. So my own research focuses on Neolithic violence and cranial fractures, and this is really the background to today, and the research that some of the demonstration you'll be seeing as part of. Okay. So and I've been looking at the evidence of hedge injuries caused by violence, and a lot of the injuries I find are blunt force injuries, and I've been mulling this over for a long time. So one fine day, I was on holidays in Germany. I went to kind of a recreated medieval site, and there were some reenactors, and there was Silvio shooting his sling, and you can see there's a kind of target mounted on a wooden board, and these are the impact scars of the slings on the wooden board. And I looked at them and went, whew, that's exactly the same size as some of the cranial injuries and shape that I see. So maybe we should do something about this. So these are some examples. Okay, this is an injury to the back of the head, just here, and this is to the top of the head. So kind of, circular kind of injuries that might be suggesting projectile use. Okay, probably something like that. So the more we looked at that, we started to think about experimental setups generally for looking at different types of blunt force and what might be causing them, looking at the implements and whether we could identify what implements were used. And we started that through some MSc research by Megan Dwyer, who's sitting at the back there. We're creating a wooden club from the Neolithic, you can see. So this was found in the River Thames, a wooden club dating to about 3,500 BC. We made a reconstruction. We used this material, which you'll be seeing later on, and there's an example of that at the back, called symbone. So it's used in ballistic testing. It reacts like bone, and it's a round shape, a bit like a head, not perfect. Obviously, your heads aren't completely round. We fill it with ballistic jelly, and we fling stuff with it or hit it, which we did in this case. So these are some of the results, which were quite exciting, because I started looking at some of these injuries and went, oh, look, I've seen this before in the archaeological record. And in the publication for this site, it's a Neolithic site from Austria, it just said blunt force, injury, etc. But it matches what we got through the club. So earlier this week, what we did, and you'll be seeing that once we go outside, we set up experiments using the symbone and trying to hit it with the sling. So using the type of ammunition you've seen, and this is the result. A very nice result. It probably, I'm saying nice, obviously in a real life situation for me as a researcher, that's an interesting result, but keep in mind this is a fatal injury. If this was somebody's head, they'd be gone. It's also important for you to note in terms of once we go outside and have the demonstration that you listen to where you need to stand. He's very good at what he's doing. I've no doubt he's not going to hit any of you, but you need to be...
On the other hand, the 200 grams of rock, and you don't want it going anywhere near you.
Exactly. And coming back to Tuesday, when it was so windy that the wind actually, as he was throwing, pushed the rock out of the sling sideways. This is when we stopped, by the way. So this really kind of, this is why you're here today and why I'm interested in this, because hopefully, as I've shown, slings, the evidence for sling use is patchy, probably not because people out of sudden stopped using them, but it's probably related, first of all, to the scale of their use, especially in earlier prehistory. So we're not talking about armies having caches of thousands of sling stones, as well as the survival of the evidence in terms of whether you use, what kind of stones you use, whether they have a particular shape, whether you use clay, you use baked clay or air-dried clay, again, survival issues there, and the slings themselves, which are made out of organic materials, so they don't survive particularly. Okay, so that's all I have to say for the moment. We have tea and coffee going through those doors. Megan will show you in a minute. And also at the back there, we have a selection of slings as well as different types of shot. and the club and one of the spheres from the research Megan has been doing on blunt force trauma. So you're more than welcome to have a look. So tea break will probably take about 20 minutes or so, and after that we'll go outside and start with the fun bit. Okay. Are there any questions before we run off?